Um, we're gonna just kind of jump right to it. I'll introduce myself. I'm Ryan Rivas. I'm the publisher of Borough Press. Again, thanks so much for being here. For those who don't know, Borough Press has been around since 2010, and just last year we moved our operations to Stetson University's MFA of the Americas Creative Writing Program. During that transition, we decided to focus on doing more limited edition type books with a focus on collaborations between writers and visual artists. And there was a period of limbo when Borough's fate was a bit in flux amid COVID, and I held off on looking for new books. So that when the time came to create this year's lineup, I was in a bit of a time crunch. And as I typically do, I reached out to folks I've worked with before, as well as friends in the writing community to see what was out there and what manuscripts might be looking for a home. And I feel like in a short period of time, the universe really delivered. Finding Rancher would not have been possible without Teresa Carmody pointing me in Selah's direction. The essay, which already came with stunning artwork by H.C. Dunaway Smith, seemed to kind of fall into my lap. And I read it in one sitting, and I was floored by the way it asks multiple big questions all at the same time. Is it possible to write anything new about rape? What is the purpose of an essay? What does time do to an essay and its author? And I loved how the latter kind of comes off as both theory and practice. I could feel time passing for the narrator and the author, and I could feel it swirling around me as I sat there reading. And in this sense, the book was kind of like an embodied experience as well. And of course, what's not to love about the things within it, such as harvesting Black Widow spider eggs and basement ghosts named Larry. It kind of had me at the spider eggs, but it was a miracle that it landed with Borough, and I'm so grateful for it. And though it can be read in one sitting, it gives you plenty to sit with for a really, really long time. So I hope if you've read it, you know. If you haven't, you've got time. I was also incredibly lucky to find Little God after reaching out to Avni, whose poems I published online some months before, and whose work I came across thanks to the writer S.J. Sindhu, who'd recommended Avni. When I asked her if she had any poetry projects, I was thrilled to receive scans of an entirely ambidextrously handwritten manuscript. As it turned out, the poems were written under these constraints: one poem a day, written by hand, alternating hands from day to day. And the poems follow a recurring unnamed speaker, as well as a character named Little God. The intimate banter that drives the book, which is both hilarious and dark, makes you feel like you're eavesdropping. And I could not only hear the variations of the characters' conversations, which are at times melodic and at times clipped and kind of glitchy, I could see it in the handwriting, as if I was looking at a musical score. It was really a cool experience. And after wrangling the poems into book form, I do think the outrageousness of those moments kind of lives on in well-earned exclamation points and all caps declarations, which most writers cannot pull off, but I will say that Avni does. And though we watch Little God shapeshift from one poem to the next, they appear in many different kind of forms. The artist Mimi Serbusova made these beautiful illustrations that go along with the book, and in those we get to see Little God in its most Floridian form, which I appreciate as a Floridian, which is the ibis. And so I'm endlessly grateful to Avni, Selah, Heather, and Mimi, and everyone else who had a hand in making these books possible. Also, thank you all again for being here to celebrate with us. I'm going to drop a link in the chat now, and you should you need to grab one of the limited edition hardcovers of Little God or Rancher. They're only available from Borough. Otherwise, you can find the paperbacks and ebooks anywhere else. And then should you want to support Borough Press further, you can check out the subscribe link to learn more about our 2022 offerings and why it's important, why subscribers are important to us. But I won't give you the pitch right now. Now's not the time. Tonight, instead, we will have 2 readings. After each reading, I'm going to give everyone a chance to unmute and yell and cheer for our beloved readers. In the meantime, feel free to leave lots of love in the chat. After both readings, Avni and Selah will be in conversation for a while, and after that, we'll do an audience Q&A. So if you have a question for either writer, feel free to leave it in the chat at any time, and I'm going to do my best to get to as many of those as possible. So without further ado, our first reader tonight is Selah Saterstrom. Selah Saterstrom is the author of the novels Slab, The Meat and Spirit Plan, and The Pink Institution, all published by Coffee House Press, as well as the award-winning book of essays, Ideal Suggestions, Essays in Divinatory Poetics, published by Essay Press. She is the Director of Creative Writing at the University of Denver, and she co-directs Four Queens, a platform for creative and divinatory arts. She lives in Denver with wife, writer, and book designer Hannah Ray Hegnauer, and their daughter. Please welcome Selah Saterstrom.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you. And thank all y'all for being here to celebrate these books coming into the world. It means so much that you would all gather to join us this evening. So a big thank you to Teresa Carmody, who not only is woven into the fabric of Rancher, but who made the introduction between myself and Borough Press. And it has just been delight piled upon delight to be in process with Borough Press. And it's been an absolutely magical trajectory. And so thank you, Teresa, and thank you to Borough Press and to Ryan, an amazing editor and visionary publisher. And I'm so excited to be reading with Avni tonight, who I am a tremendous fan of. And so, yes, all right, okay, let me move on to the reading. But I also just want to one quick shout out to my collaborator, H.C. Dunaway Smith, known to her friends as Heather. I cannot imagine this essay without the architecture of her illustrations and the energetic calibration that it brings to the project. So it's been marvelous to also do this experience with Heather. So this is so much a book about friendship, and I appreciate seeing so many friends here this evening. I do want to give a content warning that sexual assault will be invoked and explored in this reading. So, take care of your nervous systems, y'all. And on that note, I'm going to just do a brief reading from two different portions of the longer essay. How do you solve a problem like Maria? I would not know. Growing up, it was my grandmother who had the television, and every year when The Sound of Music aired on the local station, we were not allowed to watch it because my grandmother hated Julie Andrews, whom she considered an adventurous prude, a category of women she despised. In the weeks leading up to the movie, the commercials would begin. I recall my grandmother sitting crisply in her orange Sears recliner, smoking a cigarette, sneering in disgust as the lithe Andrews twirled in an alpine meadow. I have still never seen The Sound of Music, despite my preoccupation with nuns, and it is my understanding Julie Andrews played one or a former one. And though I have never seen this movie, I feel I know the story. A woman in childlike love with God is reprieved from the nunnery because she has been selected for romantic love. God approves. It was, in fact, his idea. How do you solve a problem like Maria? Is also a repeated pun in the religious blogosphere concerning a different Maria, Maria Teresa Goretti, who was 11 years old at the time of her death in 1902. Half a century later, Maria was the youngest person ever to be canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church. Another first. Present at her beatification, both the saint's mother and her murderer. Maria Goretti is the patron saint of sexual assault and rape victims. You might say that she is the patron saint of the Me Too movement. There are numerous conflicting narratives concerning Maria's life and death. In early accounts, she is raped to death. Once canonized, the story shifts. Maria dies intact, a virgin who, while successfully repelling sexual intercourse, shares the gospel with her raper killer. About Maria, some things, however, are established. We know that after her attack, she was taken hours away to the nearest hospital. Their surgeons noted that she was raped, choked, and stabbed 14 times with a 10-inch awl-like instrument, with wounds penetrating her throat, heart, lungs, and diaphragm. We know that she underwent surgery without anesthesia. The hospital was apparently all out. We know that the electric lights she saw in the operating theater were the first and last she saw in her life. As she died, Maria gave a statement to the chief of police in which she named her attacker, Alessandro Serenilli, whom she said had attempted to rape her on several prior occasions. We know that Maria's mother was a widow with lots of kids and, having fallen on hard times, moved her family in with another struggling family in the rural Italian countryside in an effort to eke out an existence working in the fields. That other family was the Serenillis, and Alessandro was the 20-something son of this family. Following the death of Maria, Alessandro was tried, convicted, and sentenced to 30 years in prison. In some stories, Maria's mother and older siblings are working in the fields as she stays behind to tend her youngest sibling still in his diapers when Alessandro makes his lethal approach. In some stories, Maria's mother pimps her daughter out to Alessandro on the ruse of sending the girl to his room to mend his buttonhole. In this version, Maria pleads with her mother not to enter his bedchamber, at which point her mother loses her temper and hits Maria on the head with a shoe. Regardless, once in prison, Alessandro strikes up a friendship with a local bishop, one Monsignor Blandini. Eventually, Alessandro tells Blandini that Maria appears to him at night and that she forgives him. Well, someone should tell the Pope, and so it is that Alessandro is eventually released from prison. He is placed with an order of friars where he became an enthusiastic gardener and received housing, meals, and health care until his death at 87 years of age in 1970. If you spend any time researching Maria Goretti, you quickly learn that she is a controversial saint. The arguments about who and what she stands for are heated for those invested in the conversation. The Catholic Church has largely co-opted Maria to represent chastity. In this scenario, Maria is the ideal daughter at a purity ball where, on repeat, she makes a pledge to remain a virgin until marriage under her father's approving eye. A few feminist thinkers have attempted to reclaim Maria from this yoke, and in this sense, she is recast, but subversively so. How do you solve a problem like Maria? In 2004, the schoolgirls of St. Maria Goretti High School for Girls in South Philly made the local news. Since the start of the school year, a man, later identified as Rudy Sassinato, had been showing up on school property and exposing himself. By mid-October, the girls tired of his presence. One day, Rudy whipped out his dick as per usual, but this time a group of 25 to 30 girls were waiting for the routine to begin. The girls encircled him. Surprised, Rudy stuffed his dick back in his pants and took his exit. The girls followed. He picked up his pace. They picked up their pace. Rudy began to sprint, then run. The girls did the same, and they tracked him until they overtook him and forced him to the ground. According to witness statements, due to the brutality of the incident, bystanders did not wish to intervene. Finally, someone called the cops, and Rudy was taken to the hospital where he was treated for injuries, notably to his mouth, as the girls had kicked in his teeth. He was eventually sentenced to 13 counts of indecent exposure, open lewdness, corrupting minors, and stalking. I have gone over and over this event in my mind. To understand this scene, I enlist the help of my friend Beau, a filmmaker and devout attendant to Saint Maria Goretti. We discussed writing a screenplay about Maria Goretti. There is a 2003 Italian made-for-TV movie based on her life, which I have watched, though I don't understand Italian. I know, however, that our project will be quite different. In this extended scene, for example, we will artistically reveal how Maria Goretti enters the girls under her patronage. Once possessed, all of the girls will simultaneously open their mouths wide in silence, and then close them, and open them, and so on. The only sound, the brace architecture of gummy mouths in process. And in the mouths, butterflies. Some escape intact. Most get clogged at the congested exit valve, so that eventually the girls' mouths are stuffed open with suffering butterflies and their eyes roll to the back of their heads. Is what these girls did a good or a bad thing? Or was it a nuanced, complicated thing that troubles the binary? And if so, how do we get comfortable not knowing? How do you catch a cloud and pin it down? In 2019, Julie Andrews, who famously played Maria Von Trapp in The Sound of Music, released her memoir, Homework. She writes about her stepfather, Ted Andrews, a vaudeville performer known to Julie as Pop. It was Ted who first recognized Julie's incredible talent and brought her to the stage to perform alongside him. She also writes about how, starting at age 9, she was forced to share a bed with him and thus learned of his predatory inclinations. And one famous story about Maria Goretti, halfway through her surgery, the one without anesthesia, the surgeon says to her, "Maria, think of me in paradise," to which she replies, "Well, who knows which of us is going to be there first?" To which he knowingly replies, "You, Maria." So let me just check my time here. So that is going to conclude my reading, and thank you for listening. I'm very excited for our next reader. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Selah. Let's everybody take a moment to unmute and hoot and holler and stomp and cheer, your preferred method.
Yes, Queen.
Hey, Selah. Hey.
Fantastic.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much. Okay, our next reader is Avni Vyas. Avni Vyas is a poet living and writing in Florida. Her poetry and nonfiction can be found in journals such as Grist, Meridian, The Pinch, Juked, Crab Orchard Review, Better Magazine, Arts and Letters, Rigorous Magazine, and others. With Anne Barngrover, she is the co-author of the chapbook Candy in Our Brains from Cutbank. She is the essays editor at Honey Literary and poetry editor at The Offending Atom. She teaches in the writing program at New College of Florida. Please welcome Avni.
Hi, everyone. I just want to echo Selah's sentiments at the beginning of her reading. Selah, thank you so much for such a powerful reading and such a powerful book. We were emailing earlier this week, and I kept saying I'm transfixed by this book, Rancher. So I can't wait until we get a chance to be in conversation. Our books desperately want to talk to each other in some fascinating ways. But thank you so much for sharing, Selah. And thank you to Ryan Rivas, who has been the most generous reader and editor with our manuscripts. And thank you for taking a risk on Little God. So I'm going to share some of these poems with you. And if you haven't read the book, or if you're not familiar with it, I'll kind of give you a little context. In this, I think Ryan set it up really nicely. In this collection of poems, a speaker and a figure named Little God are in conversation with one another. Sometimes the speaker is describing a scene that's taking place. Other times Little God is speaking. You should be able to tell when which is happening. And yeah, without much further ado, I'll just get into it. Thank you. Today I love the little God who begets fragments. Of the time in workshop when William held his hand hovering, pledging, for 2 whole sentences as he spoke of his beloved before noticing us watching. Of Ekalavya slicing off his thumb as an oath to never best his guru. Of prestidigitation, a word I could rattle in my mouth's cage for an hour. Of weighted blankets. Of a coach's twang caromming in my head for 200 meters. Of your silver hoops. How when you'd flick the left one and a high E rang out like a dropped glass, a shriek. Today, the God drains his offerings, a shot of rum, a mineola, tangerine, and almond, but resists being slaked. Light vaults into the pond past the mass of fish nests where minnows shimmer in small blades. The God asks why I am so slow to forgive, why I hold unmelted your old rock. Are you helping, the God asks, the atoms unearth? He slaps his tiny God-sized knee. Are you helping? Tears of laughter rolling now. Anything at all? I don't know if you can tell yet, but Little God's kind of a jerk. That's sort of his MO, and you'll sort of see that play out over these poems. Today, that little holy God scrap trampled my bras and chewed apart my underwear in a prayer-sanctioned assembly, a numbskulled namaskara, tata adav bharatnatyam from before. In tatters, I chased him, my body useless, a soft bell with no clapper, and he was delighted. The little God wants to make words. He demands to know when I flip the magazine to a page of a bright green lawn, an ad for fertilizer, why in all his days haven't I ever taken him there? He interrupts himself with a parade of ants, a thread the God follows, ribboning from room to room, blessing the creatures and their shadows. It bobs up through a crack in the wall. The godlet contemplates leaving. You would miss me too much, he says. You'd live off of saltines and boiled peanuts. Ugh, your claws. I'll stay. Little God admonishes me for the times I didn't waggle it. He sees the ducks waggle themselves and each other. The whap flap waggle of vacationing peafowl, the pollinated burlesque of green scum ponds, the erotica of spiked scrub palm on pink silk cotton blossom. I want to dance the worm food waggle, the pollinator pastiche, the stupid stamen sonata, and I am delighted. This bitty smidgen, his tears drop and explode like roasting corn. We're at each other's throats. Before he was a god, this old windsock deity was a ghoul squatting in my lower intestine. The only difference is where, in the temple, you house the ghost. Now at home, basking in late afternoon honeycomb, the ghoul turns to me and says, "It was me, you know. It was me who starved and strangled you. your neck tender as summer rain. Little God explains comedy. When you were born, you worked the best party trick in the hospital. Your lungs, the size of some men's thumbs, sang a starshine of bird cries. And you, full head of hair, gripped by your newborn fists, played patsy to the oldest joke in history. To grip, come alive. Grip to come alive. To stop the pain, quit. But since you only knew the setup, how could you, little bird, land it? So you gripped, and we wept. Little God attends community beach yoga. I learn about letting go from white people chanting Om. If I watch the ocean in Downward Dog, the birds stand single-legged, resting between bursts of sky. If I don't, carpenter ants find us this side of the dunes. Meanwhile, the clouds smack their gum, whack open the shutters of rental homes to reveal seashell art, soft blue couches, cartoon wine bottles, single-use soap coins, stiff hand towels, a guest book full of bleached pages. Then they set me loose in the Gulf, waving their sails at my farewell. It only makes sense to head home fast. A nice sound, home. Wonder what language it's reminding me of. This is the animal that scares me most. The promise my straying was a one-off, as if I had not been stashing scarves and books back into my suitcase for years. Did you notice I barely moved in? How if I slipped a garbage bag over the heads of my hangers, I could zip up and fly off any morning? I left notes. Please love me, I'm evaporating. Taped them to the fridge, the vertical scrawl of uncertain affections. I loved you in hallways with weak light. I loved you like angry orange soda streetlight on the corner of Branch Street. Please, do you sense it? Outside the bedroom, where naked, you boasted on either cheek temporary tattoos, a gift from the latest makeshift beloved. And then remember how once I learned how to play Please, Please, Please Let Me Get What I Want, and you said, it's not my favorite, but it's good. So I hate myself in this poem. I should push her out a window before she reveals her wingspan, her pelican throat. The little God is unimpressed. He lounges in your office on a pink inflatable couch, crinkling tofutti cutie wrappers. On his way out, he traces my script, as tiny and vast as the red ant colony's tunnels bleeding apart your walls. He's off to circle the artificial thermals from a wastewater plant's mean fumes, waiting for it to get worse. The God sets my brain ablaze with steel drums, acid plinking their way up and down the scales. Sunshine, a lace of shadows, minor keys, bells. We're levitating, though it's more like treading water, muscles furious and contained as a cruel smile. Perhaps in a future, your hands float ready to conduct an orchestra of outrage and vinegar. And thus, we stay afloat in this realm, a heartbeat paradox. As long as you're a figment, I go on kicking underwater. The shower buzzes like a bell's hollow, and I soap my legs with executive affection, so stubble, nick, and seam team in the same cloud. Eventually, the future shows up everywhere. Soon I'm all of it. Bulb, acid, pith, soldered human clump of then, now, and soon. One day you'll be gone, but for now, you and the God fill everything. Earworm of ambulance sirens, wasps nesting, a low rumble of thunderstorms like an abused piano. The God pounds our heavy strings because he loves their echoes. Thank you.
Thank you, Avni. Let's all take a moment to unmute and show some love for Avni Vyas.
Right.
Oh,
incredible. I'm gonna spotlight Selah, and we're gonna let these two brilliant writers have a conversation for a while. If you think of any questions in the meantime, you can dump them in the chat, and we'll have a little bit of time towards the end for that, and I'll try to get to them all. But in the meantime, let's all listen and learn something.
Selah, I'm such a fan.
Oh my gosh, that was amazing. It was wonderful to hear the work animated by your human voice. And I'm feeling very fortunate to be sharing this space with you. Thank you for that reading. And I get to start with a question.
Yeah. Do you want to, would you like to start first and then we'll go back and forth?
Yeah, that sounds great. And if people have questions, feel free to just chime on in. You addressed this a bit, and you genuflected to the character of Little God. And I was just kind of keeping this running litany of notes when I was reading your book, and tracking this shape-shifting, incredible character. And some of the descriptors I wrote down: shapeshifter, hermetic emanation, subversive saint, beloved devil, errant streak of one's own multivalence, a ghost when the self is the one sponsoring the haunting. So, and just in thinking of this character of Little God, I'm wondering if you can talk about like just the who, what, why, where of this character, this remarkable character, Little God.
So Little God is, I don't know, I don't really know where he kind of blew in from, but he was kind of this like counterpoint to the figure of Balkrishna, which in a lot of like Hindu mythology, you'll see like child Krishna depicted as a god, and child Krishna sort of represents mischief and is playful and flirtatious, and he's always getting up into something, but he's revered as this god, even though he's kind of like kind of a brat, sort of doing his own thing anyway. And so there's this sort of like funny tension. I always thought it was funny, like this little god could get away with kind of behaving selfishly, but by virtue of his birthright, he was a god. And Balkrishna is also like revered, and so we see reflected back this like what counts as innocence, or what counts as childhood, reflected back and kind of made sort of holy by this mythos. And I really wanted to kind of take a hammer to that a little bit. I conceived of Little God as less fair. I don't think Little God is. I think Little God's a little bit of a jerk and kind of playful, but he's kind of the voice that always pushes back and says like, why did you expect things to go your way? Why did you think it was going to work out? Like, what makes you think you deserve anything working out? And not in a self-condemning way, but more like an extension of maybe like the natural forces of the universe. So I think of Little God sort of as the weather. Why did you think it was always going to be sunny? Why did you think the hurricane was supposed to strike the house? So these questions of like, why do you deserve to live? Not because that's a mean question, but because in the order of the universe, things are always in flux and things are always changing. And so to have Little God operate as sort of this reminder, why is your heart supposed to stay intact? Those kinds of questions.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that that list of like characterizations of Little God was so heartwarming to read, because I was thinking like the self-sponsored haunting felt in particularly really resonant. And I guess maybe that's one way to maybe pivot. So I'm gonna shift and ask you a question, if that's okay. the section that you read from, How Do You Solve a Problem Like Maria, I think was the part that sort of had my heart in my throat for most of my reading when I first read your book. And when I think about what your book is able to do, what this essay can do is demonstrate capacity at this kind of ultimate degree. So your essay can hold so much contradiction. It can hold, I don't think of it as linear. I think of it as the way that Ryan described it, it was swirling. This dynamic swirl that as readers we're sort of inside of. How do you think about kind of the form and the content of your essay as you're working with your narrative, the self, the braids that you're building, particularly in the part that you read? What is your relationship with the form of the essay as it develops into this book?
Thank you for that, for that wonderful question. And, speaking of like the swirl, I actually like wrote down at one point in the margin of my copy of Little God, that Little God has the honesty of a hurricane. And, speaking of swirl, that quality, I love so much about that character. In terms of kind of, this particular essay, it's always felt really multivalent. And I think the reason why I was speaking earlier today with Danielle Vogel about this a bit and some of her students, that, trauma will fork your tongue so that a form will rise up to meet the nuanced complexity of the song it's there to sing. And so sometimes I feel like I'm just like dragging around my like bag of multivalence, and so there was just a way that this experience of writing this essay was always multiple in the way that trauma seeks a form, that perhaps is multiple to express its complexities. So I think that, the capacity, I don't know, it feels like it's just a multivalent approach. And this essay kind of showed up with that spirit. I don't know if that addresses the question, but I sure do appreciate your smart question. It's a really good one.
I was thinking about it because I was considering like how to talk about this book with my students, and I was thinking like I want my students to understand that I'm not ready for them to read the book yet because I don't want to talk to them about it yet, but I want them to know that I am in the swirl, I am in this storm, and I am noticing these threads kind of coming together and braiding and unbraiding, right? They're tangling and untangling. So how do you solve a problem like Maria, to me, holds echoes of the Black Widow spider that gets invoked earlier on, the natural world that's threading through, even the philosophies of Diderot that are like kind of introduced earlier. So I guess like your answer, trauma forking the tongue in order to sing the song that it needs to sing, is a really apt answer, particularly because why should the song share a unified melody? Why
Right.
should an essay resolve or answer any questions? And I really admire that this text does not seek to land those resolutions cleanly, and instead invites the reader to experience the complications and stay in those complications on the page, off the page, and then carry this essay with them, like in their bodies as they move out throughout their lives.
Thank you so much for that close reading and for that engagement with this text. It's very moving and to hear it, and thank you. And it very much mirrors the way that I feel about Little God, which also, holds these contradictions. It's not about solving anything. It's about uncovering strategies to continue persisting with the marvelous and terrifying uncertainty. And I feel like, Little God does that. And, just to kind of, one question I would love to ask you about is the process that kind of animated this book. That, really remarkable process. You employed this kind of ambidextrous approach, writing some poems with your dominant hand, some poems with your non-dominant hand. And this volley, I feel like, created this very nuanced pathway for the work to kind of travel down and arrive. And I would just love to hear anything you have to say about how the process, which strikes me as very divinatory in nature, anything you want to say about the process as it relates to this work. I would love to hear you speak about that.
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting that. So this ambidextrous process was, I think, singularly humbling. Like that's kind of the word that I return to again and again. Not because Little God is saying anything brilliant or that the speaker's story is so unique that other people have not experienced things like this, but that I was kind of reckoning with my own writing process, who I thought I was as a writer, by virtue of really paring down the production of language, and humbling in the sense that words did not come easy in my non-dominant hand, but learning to listen and receive was a big gift that writing this book sort of offered. And it shocked me how little I listened to myself for all of the shit that I'm happy to talk out loud and in my own head. The kind of vulnerable receptivity, I didn't realize how heavy my footfalls were in my own path in my brain, if that makes sense. So the ambidextrous kind of process was sort of just like, let's see what happens. But the more I did it, the more I think about how like visual artists employ, their visual artists will use their entire bodies, musicians will use their entire bodies, so will dancers. And, as writers, we're sort of we find our groove, and then we sort of like stay in that rut in order to produce. But I really wanted to reshape my relationship with language because I didn't want to hear my own voice anymore. I was tired of kind of telling myself the same stories about myself, my present and my future. And I think at the time I started writing these, I just wanted to find some way to invite nuance, chaos, mischief, any of it. So I really wanted Little God in some way, shape, or form to arrive. And this was kind of coming out of a dark period for me when I was writing this stuff. And I think I got better at composing with my non-dominant hand over time. I enjoy it a lot, but it made my relationship to language slow down. And so words were no longer something that I got to like throw around because I had so many of them. Words were things that I painstakingly produced, and it made me feel really humble for the language that did arrive and the words that I got to say, and the poems that my hand got to make. And so it just made me feel very protective and humble about the poems that were kind of emerging from this process. So I didn't expect to like feel as vulnerable in sharing these poems. And I think maybe that's something that our books sort of are doing, is really embracing this vulnerability, but also operating as a type of self-protection. I don't know if I'm into that, but
Oh, that was so beautifully put. That's so beautifully put. I know my book is like, saw your book and was like, pen pal.
yes.
It's part of the magic of the curation of the series that Ryan and Borough Press has done. I feel like I'm very unexpected pleasure the way that our books have been in conversation with one another, for sure.
And I think maybe that's the word that I want to jump to, if that's okay. Because your book is dense, it's dark, it's layered, it's stormy, it's swirling, all of these wonderful things. One of the questions that I'd written to you, and in hindsight, I was thinking, like, does this question belong in this conversation? I'm not sure. But the word was pleasure. And that my question was, when you're dealing with this incredibly dark and heavy and personal material, how does pleasure arrive? Is its pleasure a component in getting to write this book? How do you think about that?
That is I appreciate that question so much. And, I have to say that there's been tremendous pleasure throughout this book's trajectory and its becoming. And, for me, pleasure is something that I claim and that I celebrate, and is one of the benefits of surviving incredible disaster, and fully inhabiting that space, and with all the uncanniness and awkwardness and hilarity and joy and seriousness. And this funny thing kind of happened a few weeks before the book was going to be in the world. It occurred to me, like, oh shit, people are going to be responding to the content. And I was just so excited to talk about writing, the ecstatic process of making the book. And so I had to kind of negotiate, okay, like there's going to be this talking about the content piece. But I was just totally like amped up to talk about the ecstasy of the creative process around it. And I was like, oh yeah, right. But there is pleasure. There's pleasure in humor. There's pleasure in and the places where the tone drifts into the personality of the narrative voice. And I do really very much celebrate that. And it was difficult to write, but it was a pleasure to write. And that's also part of the contradiction, is being able, to honor that the fissure marks that trauma makes creates a sort of tattoo, and that one is capable of continually erupting in joy. Like both of those realities can be held in a life. And so this book has been a wonderful experiment in that truth. And that has also been a pleasure to experience.
I think Larry, the basement ghost, is one of my favorite parts of this book. Where, the reality of reckoning is not always graceful, and I love that Larry gets to be a conduit for these sort of conversations. And also, I think like the humor, or part of the pleasure for reading this for me, is not necessarily like the lighthearted breaks. For me, there was deep pleasure in kind of the rage, in the anger, the righteousness. And I don't often think that we know to embrace those modes as pleasurable. But as I was reading and kind of annotating in your book, I was just like, intoxicated, right, by the experience of being in the narrative, and trusting this voice to take me to the next leap wherever this voice was going. So we're reading about Black Widow spiders, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to get dark. There's something sort of like sort of unforgiving and kind of wonderful about the pleasure of venom, and sort of how that kind of gets to permeate throughout. Like it's introduced thematically, and then it gets to permeate throughout the course of the book itself. So for me, I think I asked about pleasure because it was a pleasure to read, and pleasure doesn't mean easy. Pleasure doesn't mean light. Pleasure means rich and very embodied. So yeah, it was a pleasure to read.
Thank you so much. I thank you. That means the world to me. I thank you. Thank you.
Should we, at this point, should we talk to maybe take some questions from
Sure, that
the audience?
sounds great. We have a few minutes left. And so it looks like there's a question in the chat, and I'll pose this for you. Can you talk about the process of editing and finalizing your work? What was it like to say, this is ready for print?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it was incremental. I don't know how it felt for you, but for me, I think it was, starting off with these poems that I had not shared these handwritten poems before. So Ryan was kind of, one of the first readers of this collection, and we had like 60 poems, and we were like, all right, these kind of make a sort of sense. And, at the time that I shared them, the narratives were like really different. And so it was really like having someone take the time to say, like, here are some threads that I notice. What do you notice? How do these pieces talk to each other? And so once we sort of figured out kind of how Little God and the Speaker were developing their own trajectory, not the poems that I had written in the order that I had written them, but how these characters were sort of developing on their own, it was really, I think it was having that outside readership to help shape how these disparate pieces come together. Because if Little God is a hurricane, sometimes when you're in the storm, you don't really know where it begins and ends. You're just sort of in its chaos. There were several layers. There was like moving from the handwritten pieces to the typed pieces to line editing the typed pieces. And I honestly, I can't thank Ryan enough for just sort of being there every step of the way as somebody who believed in the work. And I think, the work arriving in its own form outside of my understanding of it, I think that was the thing that helped me feel like, okay, this is ready to be a book. This isn't a thing that exists in my head anymore. It's not just a figment. What about you? Because your book also had all of these disparate parts.
Yeah, I think, I was thinking about this earlier, and, I think for me, I know a piece is done when I have absolutely done everything I can possibly imagine to assist that visitation's becoming. And that means writing up until my very edge, and even sometimes going beyond that. And it's like, okay, that's what I can do. It's not even up for me to decide if the work is good or bad. It's just up to me to do the best I can by the visitation as it moves through me. And so that involves like standard practices that inform my editorial regimen. It requires, practices of attunement that that I associate with being a writer. But it's just basically, it's just like, oh my God, I cannot do better than this is it. This is like the best I can do, and just feel my nervous system just like kind of roiling, over that. And it's like, okay, I'm done. And that's kind of how I know. And, but, to your point, like, blessings to the collaborators, the editors, the co-visionaries that help us to sort our location within the flux. And that is a really beautiful part of writing and publishing, is that those possibilities are there. And it's so cool to hear about your process and your editing process with Ryan, and just and everything that your process involved. Actually, it's just fascinating.
It's one of those things where I don't know if you feel this way or if you felt this way in the writing process, but there was like part of something in the editing process that was like, so and so could probably do this a little bit better. And I don't know where that came from, but like, oh, I bet this writer would know exactly what to do with this collection, or know how to steer it, or do whatever. But, ultimately, just like you're saying, you're writing up until the edge and beyond it. It's like, who else is going to do that? Who else knows this piece? And so it's, it's like a really funny kind of echo, thinking like, well, how else does this happen in the world unless we sort of like let it arrive? There's one question in the chat here. Avni mentioned her process of ambidextrous writing, which is fascinating. What other ways have you, Avni and Selah, brought physicality / the body into your writing process? Do you have a practice that maybe also corresponds with your writing process?
That's such a beautiful question. Thank you for that question. I mean, I would say my kind of off the cuff response to that question would be like my healing practice. Like I do a lot of body healing work. And for me right now, that looks like open source chiropractic, which is like almost like light touch therapy, but it has to do with getting your nervous system back online and remembering itself. And it involves like yoga like stretches, and that sort of thing. And so that's like, but like anytime I'm engaging with my nervous system, I'm engaging with writing. And so I mean, those processes, anything that helps me to stay in my body is somehow connected to my writing process, I guess would be like the short answer. But I very much use the body as an ally in my writing process, especially like thinking of editing, the previous question, like sound quality. My nervous system is always going to cackle at the seam of like sound. And so I trust my body to lean into and riff off of and do all the things it does to give me information about this crazy medium, that is language. So in that sense, embodiment is part of my practice. But what about for you? How does that, I don't know, anything, what comes up for you around that?
So for many years, and this is why like Little God is such a distinct like this is such a different book from anything I've ever done before. My my body practice was running. I was a distance runner for a long time. And I remember a long time ago someone saying running is for horses. And it was a yoga class, and so I wasn't a yoga practitioner at the time, or I'm not even very much now, but a friend of mine had invited me, and I'd gone to the class, and they talk about like after a really good session of stretching and sort of being in your body, you kind of go into that sort of a euphoric, blissful place. Like I stopped talking for like a full hour, which was unheard of at the time. And the yoga teacher said like, oh yeah, it's because you're a runner and running is for horses. And so, you're doing this thing that isn't really designed for your body. But in my mind, I was like, oh, but that's the thing that I do. So walking and running and usually being in some kind of constant motion, some sort of perpetual motion, used to facilitate. I would think of running as like a run-on sentence, as syntax, as threading. So even now, where physically I'm unable to do those things with frequency, that for a long time was my way of connecting to my body and breath, and like changing my breathing patterns around like lines of poems I was working with or something like that, or tracking my footfalls in terms of line beats and pressure. So like letting my body be percussive was for a long time this kind of music making process for my poems, and now it is not. So I am very curious as to what will come next, because yeah, I don't know, it'll be something else, and I'm not quite sure what it is, but it might involve some screaming and some tantrums and
Yes, I think so.
yeah, or maybe like a dance party or two, just to invite a little chaos, invite a little percussion, and let that move through me and see how it interacts with language.
Nice. I look forward to that. I have to say, very, very much so. Well, I just want to notice our time here, Ryan, and check in with you.
It's your evening. I see there's one more question in the chat. If you feel like one more is good, or if you want to invite people to ask some more, that's up to you.
I think I could do maybe one more.
All right.
And
Okay. So the question is from Gina, and I'll preface this by saying Avni already made an entire playlist for her book at Large Hearted Boy, if you want to check that out.
yeah.
This question is going to force you to whittle it down. So if for you both, if you had to pick a song or album representative of the mood / atmosphere of your book, what would it be?
Such a good
Hmm.
question.
Yeah, that's an amazing question. And it is a question I don't feel entirely prepared to answer because I want to obsess over this question. But I feel like it's a mixtape situation. And I feel like there's everything from Cyndi Lauper to Alice Coltrane on this mixtape situation. I fil like I will need to get back to Gina and everyone about that. But I definitely think it's a mixtape situation, and it includes pop, tired pop classics, and obscure, maybe like Pharaoh Sanders tunes as well. So that's what I can say towards that. But I love the question, and would like to respond in the future in more detail.
Well, yeah, I had the opportunity to actually compile sort of that mixtape approach, and you can listen on Spotify to the actual playlist. Some of the songs were surprising, some of them were not. When it came to like how Little God came together, something that still sort of strikes me as kind of odd is there was a lot of Nina Simone, but then there was also a lot of Arcade Fire. So there was this desire for Little God to like dance around and kind of feel expansively big, but then I think there were these moments of having Nina Simone's voice just work as a well and sort of operate as something that you could dip your entire self into if you're like listening to her voice. So what I tried to do was, in the blog post, I have, the playlist listed out, and I kind of speak to each song a little bit if you're interested in learning more about it. But I think that question is so good. And it was so hard to develop even a playlist. So I have so much respect for DJs, for people who curate music lists. I learned so much about the process, and there was no right answer, and that really, I struggled with that a lot too. But thank you so much for that question. And now I'm like, oh, should I maybe go do part 2 or like try another one? I don't know. We'll see.
Thank you both so much for this amazing reading.